The humans will not wait forever, Vareth intoned, his voice resonating with an unnatural calm that betrayed none of his own apprehension. We must act, or the Kroven's aggression will provoke an unstoppable conflict. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Kroven Collective, a reptilian race known for their ruthless expansionism, had already ravaged several human colonies. Despite their outward show of diplomacy, whispers of their plans for a larger campaign against Earth had reached the Council. Yet the galaxy's governing body, mired in its bureaucratic paralysis, had failed to act decisively. Seated in the human delegation's section, Ambassador Tyrell watched the proceedings with a stony expression. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s. Tyrell carried himself with a quiet authority that often unnerved his alien counterparts. The Council's pleas for peace had grown tiresome, their reluctance to acknowledge the Kroven's duplicity bordering on willful ignorance. Tyrell leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the holographic map projected above the chamber floor. It displayed a cluster of systems on the galaxy's fringe, with red markers indicating the Kroven's expanding territory. "The Council forgets," Tyrell finally said, his voice cutting through the din, "that humanity has no interest in negotiations that amount to surrender. The Kroven don't seek peace. They seek submission." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Vareth's translucent skin flushed a faint blue, a sign of discomfort among his species. "Ambassador Tyrell," he began, his tone conciliatory, "surely you understand the value of diplomacy. War would devastate." "Diplomacy," Tyrell interrupted, "has already cost us too much. We've buried thousands of civilians while this council debated whether to issue a strongly worded condemnation. Humanity isn't waiting for your permission to defend itself." A few delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none spoke. The tension was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of humanity's growing reputation as a force unwilling to bow to galactic norms. Tyrell rose from his seat, his tall frame casting a shadow across the holographic map. "I'll deliver your request for negotiations to Earth's leadership," he said, his tone laced with irony. "But don't expect much enthusiasm. The Kroven don't deserve our trust, and the Council hasn't earned it either." Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode out of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the uneasy silence. Halfway across the galaxy, on a barren moon orbiting a dying star, Captain John Paulson watched as his squad prepared for deployment. The dimly lit briefing room smelled faintly of oil and scorched metal, a byproduct of the relentless maintenance required to keep their aging dropship operational. Paulson stood by the mission table, his sharp eyes scanning the holographic layout of the Kroven base they were about to infiltrate. He was a man carved from war, his face a mosaic of scars and hardened lines. His squad referred to him as Iron Paulson, a moniker that suited his unyielding nature. Paulson didn't care for politics or the Council's endless bickering. His loyalty lay with his men and the mission, and today's objective was clear: eliminate the Kroven leadership before they could mobilize for a larger assault. "ETA is 20 minutes, said Lieutenant Jackson, a wiry man with an easy grin that belied his precision under pressure. He leaned against the table, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "You think the Council's still hoping for a peace summit?" Paulson snorted. "The Council's hoping someone else will clean up their mess. Same as always." Jackson chuckled, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. The weight of the mission pressed on all of them, though none would admit it outright. Across the room, Sergeant Dorian and Corporal Ford inspected their gear, while Specialist Vega calibrated a portable hacking device designed to bypass Kroven security systems. Each man had his role, and Paulson trusted them implicitly. "Listen up," Paulson said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. The squad gathered around, their faces illuminated by the flickering blue light of the hologram. "We've got one shot at this. The Kroven leaders are holed up in a fortified bunker beneath their main compound. Intel says it's heavily guarded, but nothing we haven't handled before." He tapped the hologram, zooming in on the bunker schematics. Priority targets are their top generals. We take them out, we cripple their ability to coordinate an offensive. This isn't about sending a message. It's about ensuring they don't get another chance to hit us. The men nodded, their expressions grim but determined. Paulson's gaze swept over them, lingering for a moment on each face. They were more than soldiers to him. They were brothers, forged in the crucible of countless battles. He wouldn't let any of them die needlessly, but they all understood the risks. Questions? Paulson asked. Yeah, Ford said, his voice tinged with dry humor. Think the Croven will throw us a welcome party. Jackson smirked. If they do, let's make sure we leave them a few parting gifts. The squad laughed, the tension easing just enough to remind them why they fought. Not just for survival, but for each other. Paulson allowed himself a faint smile before turning back to the hologram. The countdown to deployment ticked steadily, each second bringing them closer to the point of no return. As the dropship engines roared to life, Tyrell's words echoed in Paulson's mind. The Croven don't seek peace, they seek submission. The Galactic Council could beg for negotiations all they wanted, but Paulson and his men understood the truth. Peace wasn't won in grand chambers or on gilded pedestals. It was carved out of chaos, one mission at a time. The doors to the briefing room slid open, flooding the space with the harsh red light of the dropship's interior. Paulson stepped forward, his boots heavy against the metal floor. Gear up, he ordered. We've got a job to do. As the squad filed out, their laughter replaced by the quiet determination of men who knew they might not return, Paulson lingered for a moment, staring at the hologram. The Croven leadership thought themselves untouchable, shielded by layers of technology and arrogance. They were wrong. Paulson clenched his fists, his resolve solid as steel. If the Council lacked the spine to act, then the Rangers would. And when the smoke cleared, the galaxy would remember why humanity wasn't to be underestimated. The barren landscape stretched endlessly beneath the dim light of a dying sun. Jagged ridges cast long shadows over the desolate terrain, the air thick with metallic dust that clung to every surface. Captain John Paulson crouched behind a rocky outcrop, his dark armor blending seamlessly with the terrain. His visors displayed pulse with data, mapping the Croven stronghold carved into the base of a distant mountain. Even from this distance, the structure loomed like a fortress of nightmares, its alien architecture radiating menace. Jackson, status report, Paulson murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Clear so far, Lieutenant Jackson replied, his tone steady. He was a few meters ahead, his live frame barely visible as he surveyed the path to the stronghold. No patrols in sight, but their drones are sweeping the ridge. We've got about a 3-minute window before they circle back. Paulson glanced over his shoulder at the rest of the squad. Sergeant Dorian was methodically checking his gear, his broad shoulders tense with anticipation. Dorian was the muscle of the team, his sheer presence a silent promise of what would happen if things went sideways. Beside him, Corporal Ford adjusted the scope on his rifle, his expression a mask of calm focus. Specialist Vega, the youngest of the group, was busy syncing his portable hacking device with the squad's comms. Vega, Paulson said, you're up front with me. Jackson, take point. Dorian and Ford, cover our 6. We move fast, stay quiet, and stick to the plan. The men nodded, their movements efficient and disciplined. They didn't need speeches or reassurances. They had all been through enough to know what was at stake. Paulson activated the squad's cloaking systems, and one by one, the Rangers disappeared into the shadows. The approach to the Croven base was a gauntlet of natural hazards and advanced security measures. The squad moved in perfect synchronization, their boots silent on the rocky ground. Paulson's visor highlighted the faint outlines of tripwires and pressure plates buried in the dirt. The Croven didn't just rely on technology. They were cunning predators, and this was their hunting ground. A faint hum filled the air as a Croven drone swept overhead, its sleek form bristling with sensors. The squad froze, their cloaking devices flickering slightly under the strain of the drone's scanning beam. Paulson's hand tightened around his rifle as he tracked the drone's movement. For a moment, it hovered, its blue light casting an eerie glow over the rocks. Then, with a faint whir, it moved on. "Close one," Jackson whispered through the comms. "Stay sharp," Paulson replied. "They'll only get smarter the closer we get." As they approached the mountain's base, the terrain shifted. The jagged rocks gave way to a smooth metallic surface, the edge of the Krovan stronghold. The structure appeared to grow out of the mountain itself, its surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. A single entry point was visible, a narrow access tunnel guarded by a pair of Krovan sentries. Paulson signaled for the squad to halt and scan the area. The Krovan guards were massive, their reptilian forms encased in sleek armor that shimmered in the low light. They carried plasma rifles, their sharp claws twitching with restless energy. Paulson could feel their presence like a tangible weight, a reminder that the Krovan were more than just warriors. They were predators. "Jackson, take the one on the left," Paulson ordered. "Dorian, you've got the right. Silent takedowns. Vega, be ready to bypass the door lock." The two men moved without hesitation, their cloaks rippling like liquid shadows. Jackson approached his target with surgical precision, a blade glinting in his hand. In a single, fluid motion, he plunged the blade into the Krovan's neck, severing its vocal cords. The alien collapsed without a sound. At the same moment, Dorian dispatched the other guard with brutal efficiency, his powerful grip twisting the Krovan's head at an unnatural angle. Paulson gestured for Vega to move up. The young specialist knelt by the access panel, his fingers flying over the controls of his hacking device. Sparks danced across the panel as Vega worked, his brow furrowed in concentration. Come on," Vega muttered. "Hurry it up," Dorian growled, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I'm working as fast as I can," Vega shot back, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. A soft chime echoed from the panel, and the door slid open with a hiss. Vega exhaled in relief, and the squad slipped inside. The air within the tunnel was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the harsh environment outside. The walls were smooth and seamless, their surfaces glowing faintly with the same runes that adorned the exterior. "Keep it tight," Paulson said, leading the way. "Vega, get us a map of this place. We need to locate the bunker before they realize we're here." Vega nodded, tapping into the stronghold's network through his device. His visor lit up with streams of alien code, and after a few tense moments, a holographic map appeared in front of him. "Got it," he said. "The bunker's 3 levels down, heavily reinforced. There's a maintenance shaft that should bypass most of their patrols, but it's a tight squeeze." "Then we'll make it work," Paulson replied. The squad moved deeper into the stronghold, their every step calculated. The tunnel eventually opened into a sprawling corridor, its ceiling lined with glowing orbs that cast an unnatural light. The faint hum of machinery reverberated through the walls, a constant reminder of the alien power at play. They encountered their first patrol near the entrance to the maintenance shaft. 3 Krovan soldiers marched in formation, their movements precise and disciplined. Paulson signaled for the squad to take cover, and they melted into the shadows. "Wait for my mark," Paulson whispered. The Krovan patrol drew closer, their guttural language echoing off the walls. Paulson's finger hovered over the trigger of his rifle, his breath steady. The moment the lead Krovan stepped into range, he fired. The suppressed shot struck the alien square in the chest, dropping it instantly. The other 2 Krovan reacted with alarming speed, raising their weapons, but Jackson and Ford were faster. 2 more shots rang out, and the patrol crumpled to the ground. "Clear," Paulson said. "Vega, get that shaft open." Vega moved quickly, prying open the maintenance hatch with a portable tool. The shaft was narrow, its walls lined with cables and pipes. One by one, the squad climbed in, their movements careful and deliberate. The climb was slow and tense, the enclosed space amplifying every sound. Paulson led the way, his senses on high alert. The Krovan wouldn't stay oblivious for long, and every second counted. As they reached the bottom of the shaft, Paulson paused. The air felt heavier here, charged with an almost imperceptible energy. Beyond the hatch below lay the bunker and their targets. "Once we drop in," Paulson said, his voice low but firm, "there's no turning back. Stay sharp and stick to the plan. We finish this." The squad nodded, their faces resolute. Paulson reached for the hatch, his pulse steady. Whatever awaited them on the other side, they would face it together. With a final breath, Paulson pushed the hatch open, and the squad descended into the heart of enemy territory. The hatch opened into darkness, thick and oppressive. The bunker's walls, carved from the same metallic stone as the rest of the stronghold, absorbed the faint light from the squad's visors, leaving the air heavy with anticipation. Captain John Paulson crouched low as he stepped through, his rifle sweeping the room in precise arcs. Behind him, his squad followed silently, their movements perfectly synchronized. The chamber they entered was vast, its high ceiling disappearing into shadow. Banks of alien machinery hummed softly along the walls, their glowing interfaces casting an eerie, shifting light. Paulson could feel the bunker's energy, a living, breathing thing that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the Krovan war machine. "Vega, get a scan of the room," Paulson whispered, his voice barely audible. Vega nodded, pulling a compact device from his belt. A soft ping echoed as the scanner activated, sending waves of data streaming into their visors. The layout of the bunker materialized in Paulson's display, a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, with their targets clustered in a central command room several meters ahead. There in the heart of the bunker, Vega said quietly, "Heavily fortified, but there's an auxiliary power conduit running parallel to the main corridor. If we overload it, it'll cut power to their security systems long enough to give us a shot." "Do it," Paulson ordered. Vega moved quickly, his fingers flying over the device's interface. As he worked, Jackson and Ford took up positions near the chamber's only exit, their weapons trained on the corridor beyond. Paulson felt the seconds stretch into eternity, each one a reminder of how little margin for error they had. "Done," Vega said at last, the conduit's faint hum rising to a crescendo before cutting out abruptly. The chamber dimmed further, the glow from the machinery faltering. "Let's move," Paulson said. The squad slipped into the corridor, the dim light barely illuminating the path ahead. They moved like shadows, silent and purposeful, their weapons ready. The Krovan would notice the power disruption soon, and when they did, the element of surprise would vanish. As they neared the command room, the air grew colder. The temperature dropped almost imperceptible but unmistakable. Paulson's grip on his rifle tightened. The Krovan were predators by nature, their instincts honed from millennia of conquest. They would sense the danger before they saw it. The command room's entrance loomed ahead, a massive doorway flanked by glowing glyphs that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. 2 sentries stood guard, their reptilian forms radiating menace. Paulson signaled for Jackson and Dorian to take them out, his hand a swift, precise gesture. Jackson moved first, his blade flashing in the dim light as he dispatched the nearest sentry with ruthless efficiency. Dorian followed suit, his massive hand snapping the second guard's neck with a brutal twist. The sentries fell without a sound, their weapons clattering softly to the floor. "Stack up," Paulson whispered. The squad formed up on either side of the doorway, their breath steady, their movements precise. Paulson's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was razor-sharp, focused on the mission. He placed a hand on the control panel, glancing at his men one last time. "This is it," he said. "We hit hard, we hit fast. No hesitation." He pressed the panel, and the door slid open with a hiss. The command room was a hive of activity, Krovan officers and technicians moving between glowing consoles that lined the walls. At the center of the room stood a raised platform, where three Krovan generals conferred around a holographic map. Their imposing forms cast long shadows, their armor gleaming in the faint light. Paulson didn't hesitate. He opened fire. His rifle suppressed rounds tearing through the nearest technician before the room erupted into chaos. The squad followed suit, their weapons spitting death as they moved with lethal precision. The Krovan responded almost instantly, their guttural cries filling the air as they scrambled for cover. Plasma bolts sizzled through the room, the acrid smell of burning metal and flesh mingling with the din of battle. Paulson advanced toward the platform, his every shot a calculated strike designed to clear a path. One of the generals turned, its glowing eyes locking onto Paulson. It let out a roar, drawing a massive blade from its back and charging with terrifying speed. Paulson sidestepped at the last moment, his blade flashing as he parried the strike. The force of the impact sent vibrations up his arm, but he held firm, driving the butt of his rifle into the general's chest. The alien staggered but didn't fall, its claws lashing out in a wild arc. Paulson ducked, rolling beneath the strike and coming up with his pistol drawn. He fired point-blank into the general's chest, the rounds punching through its armor and sending it crashing to the ground. "Target down," Paulson growled, turning to find his next opponent. Across the room, Dorian was locked in a brutal melee with another general, their massive forms colliding with bone-crushing force. Dorian's raw strength was a match for the alien's size, but the general's speed and ferocity pushed him to the limit. Ford provided cover fire, his precision shots picking off Krovan soldiers attempting to flank their position. "Vega, find the kill switch for their comms." Paulson barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm on it," Vega shouted, dodging a plasma bolt as he dove toward a console. His fingers flew over the controls, the alien interface flashing with incomprehensible symbols. The final general let out a deafening roar, its voice echoing like a thunderclap. It stepped onto the platform, raising a staff that crackled with energy. The room seemed to tremble as it unleashed a wave of force, sending Paulson and Jackson sprawling. Paulson gritted his teeth, forcing himself to his feet as the general advanced. He fired, but the alien deflected the rounds with a sweep of its staff, its glowing eyes fixed on him. "Jackson, flank it," Paulson ordered, his voice hoarse. Jackson nodded, slipping into the shadows as Paulson engaged the general head-on. The alien swung its staff in a wide arc, the energy crackling dangerously close to Paulson's armor. He ducked and fired again, aiming for the joints in its armor. Jackson emerged behind the general, his blade flashing as he drove it into the alien's back. The general let out a guttural roar, twisting in pain, and Paulson seized the opportunity. He fired a final round into the alien's skull, and it collapsed with a heavy thud. "Comms are down," Vega shouted, his voice triumphant. "They can't call for reinforcements." Paulson nodded, his chest heaving as he surveyed the room. The Krovan officers were either dead or fleeing, their once imposing presence reduced to chaos. The squad regrouped on the platform, their expressions grim but resolute. "It's done," Paulson said, his voice low. "The generals are down and the Krovan leadership is crippled." Dorian wiped blood from his face, his eyes hard. "Then we sent a message they won't forget." Paulson activated his comms, signaling their extraction. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. As the squad prepared to leave, Paulson allowed himself a moment to reflect. They had struck a decisive blow, but the galaxy was a dangerous place, and peace would not come easily. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice steely. "Let's move." The dropship's engines hummed softly as it cut through the upper atmosphere, the dense clouds giving way to the infinite black of space. Captain John Paulson sat near the rear of the cabin, his helmet resting in his lap, the adrenaline of the mission slowly ebbing away. Around him, the rest of the squad remained silent, each man processing the events in his own way. Sergeant Dorian leaned against the bulkhead, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes closed but his posture tense. Ford meticulously cleaned his rifle, the repetitive motion a means of keeping his hands busy. Vega sat hunched over his datapad, reviewing the files they had pulled from the Krovan bunker. Jackson, ever the quiet professional, stared out the viewport, his gaze fixed on the stars as they streaked past. The Krovan generals were dead. The strike had been as precise as it was brutal, a blow that would send shockwaves through their command structure. But victory came with a cost, one that weighed heavily on Paulson's shoulders. "They're going to retaliate," Dorian said suddenly, his voice breaking the heavy silence. He opened his eyes, his piercing gaze locking onto Paulson. "We hit them hard, but they're not the kind to roll over. They'll come for us." Paulson nodded, his jaw tight. "I know. That's why we need to be ready. The Krovan don't operate like we do. They're methodical, patient. They'll regroup, and when they do, they'll aim to cripple us in ways we haven't even considered. Assuming we even get the chance to prepare," Ford added, his tone grim. "You saw how quickly they responded in the bunker. It's only a matter of time before they track our exfil point." Vega glanced up from his datapad, his face pale but determined. "It's not all bad news. The data we pulled, it's big, Captain. I've barely scratched the surface, but there's enough here to give command a fighting chance. Troop movements, supply lines, even details on their next targets." Paulson studied Vega for a moment before nodding. "Good work, Vega. Get it decrypted and uploaded as soon as we're back on the carrier. Every second counts." The young specialist nodded, returning to his work with renewed focus. As the dropship approached the USS Valiant, the carrier came into view, a colossal silhouette against the void, its hull bristling with weaponry. The sight was a reminder of humanity's resilience, a testament to their refusal to be cowed by a galaxy that seemed intent on tearing them apart. The squad disembarked in the hangar, the bustling activity of deck crews and support staff a stark contrast to the silence they had left behind. Paulson led his men toward the debriefing room, his thoughts already turning to the next steps. The room was Spartan, its walls lined with screens displaying tactical data. General Marlowe stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding despite his grizzled appearance. He turned as the squad entered, his expression unreadable. "Captain Paulson," Marlowe said, his tone clipped. "Report." Paulson straightened, his voice steady as he recounted the mission. He spared no detail, from the infiltration to the takedown of the generals. When he finished, Marlowe's eyes narrowed, his hands clasped behind his back. "You've dealt them a significant blow," Marlowe said. "But this victory is a double-edged sword. The Krovan will see this as more than an attack. It's an insult, a challenge to their dominance. They won't let it go unanswered." "We're aware of the risk, sir," Paulson replied. "But we couldn't afford to wait. The Krovan were preparing a coordinated assault on our outer colonies. Taking out their leadership buys us time. Time we desperately need." Marlowe nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the rest of the squad. "You've done your part, but the fight is far from over. Command will analyze the data you recovered and prepare for the inevitable retaliation. In the meantime, you're all on standby. Get some rest. You've earned it." Dismissed, the squad left the debriefing room, their steps heavy with exhaustion. Paulson lingered for a moment, his mind racing. Marlowe's words had struck a chord. The Krovan wouldn't just retaliate. They would escalate, pushing humanity to its limits. As he exited the room, Jackson fell into step beside him. "You're thinking too much, Captain," Jackson said, his voice calm but firm. "We did what we had to. That's all we can do." Paulson glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You always make it sound so simple." "Because it is," Jackson replied. "We fight, we survive, and we keep going. The rest is just noise." The two men walked in silence for a moment before parting ways. Paulson made his way to his quarters, the weight of command pressing down on him. He knew Jackson was right, but the burden of leadership was a heavy one, and the stakes had never been higher. Alone in his quarters, Paulson sat at his desk, his visor resting beside him. The Krovan data flickered on the screen, lines of alien code that seemed to mock him with their complexity. He leaned back, closing his eyes as the events of the mission played out in his mind. The faces of the Krovan generals haunted him, their alien features frozen in death. They had been enemies, yes, but they had also been leaders, driven by the same purpose that drove him: to protect their people, to secure their future. The thought was unsettling, a reminder of the fine line that separated them. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. Paulson opened his eyes, the screen displaying an incoming message. It was from Marlowe. "Captain Paulson," the message began, "new intelligence suggests the Krovan are mobilizing faster than anticipated. We've intercepted communications indicating a counteroffensive targeting key human installations. Your squad will be redeployed within 48 hours. Prepare accordingly." Paulson stared at the screen, the words sinking in. The war wasn't just continuing, it was escalating, and humanity's survival hung by a thread. He stood, his resolve hardening. There was no time for doubt, no room for hesitation. The Krovan had made their move, and now it was humanity's turn to respond. As he prepared to brief his squad, Paulson's mind returned to Jackson's words. "We fight, we survive, and we keep going." For now, that would have to be enough.